So he arrives at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School at 2:19 p.m. He gets out of the back seat of Mr. Key's Uber, I think it was a RAV4, and he directly goes to the 1200 building east exit. You've been there, so you know that's the closest, that pedestrian gate is the closest exit or entrance to the 1200 building. So he goes into the east double doors and immediately makes a right into the east stairwell. And as he takes out his AR-15 style rifle, that Smith & Wesson 5.5 Smith M&P 15, takes it out of the Gabella rifle bag, in walks Christopher McKenna. Christopher McKenna was a student who was in 1216, in classroom 1216. He was out on the pass, and he walks into the stairwell and face to Nikolas Cruz, and Cruz says to him, "You better get out of here. Something bad is about to happen." So Christopher McKenna runs, and he goes to get one of the school monitors, Aaron Feiss. So Cruz steps out of the east stairwell, and in the east stairwell now, there are 4 students. Ashley Baez is walking west in the hallway. Gina Montaldo was sitting on the floor. She got permission from her teacher, Miss Matlock, to work on it. It was more quiet in the hallway, to sit in the hallway right in front of classroom 1215 and work on her computer. And standing beside her, knocking on the door to 1215 to get back into classroom 1215 because they had passes to go somewhere else, was Luke Hoyer and Martin Duque Acquiano. They were students in 1215, and they were knocking on the door to get back in. Cruz steps out of the stairwell, fires and hits in the leg Ashley Baez. And maybe you can remember from the video that she runs across the hall and runs into classroom 1210. He fires at Gina, Luke, and Martin. Then he goes over to classroom 1216. 1216, classroom 1216, if you recall, is the second classroom on the north on the north side of the hall. It's the second classroom as you come in the east double doors. So he fires into classroom 1216. It shatters the glass, and he fires and he hits Alex Schachter, who was getting up from his desk. He hits him twice in the chest. Alex was 14 years old, got shot twice in the chest, and he died of his wounds. Cruz fires into 1216, then he walks away right next to 1216. He kneels on the ground. He takes off his backpack. He unzips it and brings out his tactical vest with the 10 magazines in it. He puts the vest on. He takes out the 10-round magazine, lays it on the ground, pulls out a magazine from the vest, and puts a new magazine into the gun. Then he walks over to classroom 1214 and 1215. 1215 is the second classroom on the south side of the hall from the east double door entrance. And on the south side, 1214 and 1215 here, the first classroom coming in is 1218. Then there's 1215, and then there's 1214. And 1214 and 1215 abut, they're right next to each other. And that's where Gina and Luke and Martin are. So he walks up there and fires into them, wounding them. He then fires into classroom 1214, which was the Holocaust class. He hits Helena Ramsey. Helena Ramsey was 17 years old. He shoots her 4 times, killing her. He shoots and kills Nicholas Dorette, who was 17. He shoots and kills him, shoots him 3 times. He wounds Samantha Brady, Samantha Fuentes, Isabel Checker, and Danielle Menescu. Then he walks back to 1216 and fires additional shots into 1216. This time he shoots and kills Elena Petty. Elena Petty was shot 4 times and she died of her wounds. He shoots and kills Alyssa Alphadev. She's shot 8 times and she died of her wounds. He also wounded William Olson, Justin Colton, Genesis Valentin, Alexander Durrett, who's the brother of Nikolas Cruz, who was just shot and killed over in 1214, and Keshava Magaporian. So there was 5 people he wounded in 1216. Then he moves west, and as he's moving west, in comes the athletic director, school monitor, Christopher Hickson. He runs through the west doors. And when he runs through the west doors, the defendant, Nikolas Cruz, shoots him twice, once in the torso and once in the leg. Christopher Hickson falls to the ground and crawls over to the north side of the hall to an alcove near the west door and double door entrance. And he's seeking, cover, shelter. The defendant continues west. And when he comes up to 1215 again, he shoots into Gina again, Martin again, and Luke again. And Gina, and you saw the photographs, you remember the testimony of Dr. Osborne, the medical examiner? He did the autopsy on Gina Montalvo. She was shot 4 times, and she died of her wounds. But 2 of those wounds were contact wounds. Contact wounds, which means the end of that M&P 5.56 AR-15 style rifle was right up against her chest and right up on her abdomen. Right on her skin. She was shot 4 times and she died. And she also had what Dr. Osborne called a defensive wound. What's a defensive wound? When someone tries to protect themselves by raising their legs or their hands. Joaquin Oliver had one too, if you'll recall. Gina had a bullet that went through the back of her hand and came out her palm, as if holding up to protect herself. She had a contact wound of her chest and her abdomen. She died of her wounds. And do you remember what one of the YouTube comments from Nikolas Cruz was? Remember? I don't mind shooting a girl in the chest. That's exactly what he did to Gina Montalvo. Then he walks, after he shoots into Luke and Martin and Gina, he proceeds to 1213. Classroom 1213 is the next classroom as you proceed west on the north side of the hall, next to 1216. He fires into 1213, and when he fires into 1213, he shoots and kills Carmen Centro. He hits, one of the shots hit her in the head, and she died of her wounds. He wounds Madeline Wilford, Samantha Mayer, and Benjamin Wickander. Then he proceeds west, and as he's proceeding west, he passes on the north side of the hall Christopher Hickson. And I'm going to show the video. He turns and fires a 3rd shot into Christopher Hickson, and Christopher Hickson died of his wounds. Christopher Hickson was 49 years old. The defendant then walks to the interior door that leads into the west stairwell, and as he enters the west stairwell, here's Aaron Feist. Aaron Feist is a coach, and he was a school monitor that Christopher McKenna ran to get. And Coach Feist opens up the outside door to the west stairwell. Just as Cruz enters the stairwell from the interior door, Cruz turns and fires and hits Coach Feist twice in the chest, killing him. Coach Feist was 37 years old. He died of his wounds right there outside that west stairwell door. Cruz then goes up to the second floor and goes up on the west stairwell to the second floor looking for more targets. Now, the students and teachers on the second floor had heard the shots from the first floor. The defendant fired 70, I want to say that again. The defendant fired 70 shots on the first floor and 2 shots in the west stairwell at Coach Feist. You talk about finger tapping, and you heard it. He fired 70 shots on the first floor. So he goes up to the second floor. The teachers and students had heard the sound, so now they're taking precautions, a code red, for an active shooter. So they turn off the lights, they get away from the door, they're hiding. And as you know, there's 10 classrooms on the first floor, 10 on the third floor, and second floor, 10 on the third floor. So the 10 classrooms on the second floor, 3 of those classrooms were empty. The defendant fired 6 shots on the second floor. He couldn't find any targets. He fired into classroom 1231, which was empty, and 1234, which was empty. So he goes the length of the hallway after firing the 6 shots, and now he's at the east stairwell. So he goes up the east stairwell. Now, the students and teachers on the third floor didn't hear, they heard some noises, but they weren't as distinct as what the teachers and students heard on the second floor. So they, at 2:22:38, the fire alarm went off. And remember we talked about the evidence was that the dust from the ceiling tiles, because of the percussion of the defendant firing his weapon on the first floor 70 times, caused the ceiling tiles to pop up. And when the ceiling tiles popped up, dust came down. And you saw it on the video, the dust. It looks like smoke. So the camera system doesn't know the difference between dust and smoke, so it sounded at 2:22:38. So the teachers and the students on the third floor, when they hear the fire alarm at 2:22:38, they evacuate. They didn't hear the shots like the students and teachers on the second floor. So and as you know, there's a stairwell on the east side and there's a stairwell on the west side, so the students and teachers started to evacuate. But once the students started to evacuate, they heard the shots on the second floor, and you saw it on the video, they all come running back. And there's a mishmash, everybody running and trying to get somewhere. Meanwhile, the defendant is coming up the east stairwell. And as he comes up the east stairwell and opens the door, the first classroom on the east side, on the north part of the hallway, is 1256. And that's Scott Beagle's classroom. He was a geography teacher. So he is holding the door open, and you can see it on the video. He's holding the door open for his students so they can get into the classroom. And the teacher next to him in 1255 was Stacy Lapel. She was the English teacher right next to him. She's also holding the door open for students, not just their students, any students to run into the classrooms for safety. So when Cruz comes in out of the stairwell, he fires 4 shots into the back of 35-year-old Scott Beagle and kills him. Scott Beagle died right there. He also fired and wounded Stacy Lapel. The defendant continues to fire down the hallway. He hits and wounds Meadow Pollock and Carol Ogren, and they run and they hide in the alcove of classroom 1249. He shoots and wounds Anthony Borges, Kyle Lehman, and Marian Kabachenko, who were in the hallway. He continues to move west, and as he's moving west, he fires again. This time, the students are running to the west stairwell. He hits in the leg Joaquin Oliver, who runs into the alcove of the men's restroom on the north side of the hallway. He shoots and he hits Peter Wang, who falls on the southwest corner right next to the west stairwell door. And he hits and kills Jamie Guttenberg. Jamie Guttenberg is running to the west stairwell. And as she runs, he shoots her and hits her in the back. In the back, right near her neck. It severs her spinal cord. I don't know if you remember Dr. Osborne's testimony. She falls through the west stairwell door and falls onto the third floor landing on the west stairwell. The defendant continues west, and you'll see it on the video. He turns and aims into Meadow Pollock and Carol Logren. Carol Logren was shot 3 times. She's 14 years old, and she died of her wounds. Meadow Pollock was shot 6 times, and she was in the alcove with Kara. She was 18 years old. She died of her wounds. Then the defendant goes over to the men's restroom alcove where Joaquim Oliver is, and he fires into Joaquim Oliver. Joaquim Oliver was shot 4 times, 17 years old. He died of his wounds. Remember the testimony of Dr. Tops, the medical examiner? He said there was a defensive wound, that the bullet went through the palm of his right hand, exited the back of his right hand, and entered into Joaquim Oliver's left temple and killed him. Defendant then leaves from the west, the restroom on the west side, and proceeds down to Peter Wang. And you saw in the video that Peter Wang was laying on the ground. And remember when the kids were running out, students were running out, you can see him moving. So when he's laying on the ground, what? He's still alive, right? Because he's moving. Cruz walks up to Peter Wang and shoots him in the head 4 times. Peter Wang was shot 12 times. And you remember what the defendant told, I think it was Dr. Denny, could have been Dr. Scott, that when he shot Peter Wang, his head blew up like a watermelon. Remember that? He was shot 4 times in the head. Peter Wang died of his wounds. The defendant then goes over and he looks out the west stairwell door, that little window in the door. And then he doesn't go down the stairwell. He goes into 1240. He shoots the glass out, shatters the glass, reaches in, opens the door, and now he's in 1240, the teacher's lounge. Why is he in 1240? Because of what I was talking about before. The west windows look over the west part of the campus, and the south windows look over the south part of the campus. On the south side, there's a courtyard. On the west, there's walkways and there's parking lots. The defendant fired his AR-15 5 times out of the west window and 5 times out of the south window, looking for targets. He left a 40-round empty magazine on the desk in 1240, and he left 1240 after firing those 10 rounds. So, up on the 3rd floor, he fired 51 rounds in the 3rd floor and another 10 rounds in 1240. So that's 61 rounds he fired on the 3rd floor. The 10 in 1240 and 51, outside of 1240. So you got a total of 139 rounds that the defendant fired in the 1200 building on February the 14th, 2018. So he goes out of 1240. He passes the body of Peter Wang, opens up the door. It's on the 3rd floor landing. Laying there dead is Jamie Guttenberg. He takes off his vest, lays it on the 3rd floor landing, puts his rifle down next to it, and he runs down the stairs and exits the west doors to the 1200 building. He runs south and then west. He runs west and then south by the tennis courts. And as he's running south, what does he do? He blends in with all the students and the teachers who are evacuated. Oh, he's got his JROTC polo shirt on, blended right in. As a matter of fact, he bumps into Nicolette Muccietta. Remember her testimony? She sees him, and she hadn't seen him in a while, but she knew him from school, and she says to him, "Hi." He responds, "Hi." She says to him, plans for college? Defendant responds, somewhere in Florida. Then he walks to the Walmart, to the Subway that's inside of Walmart, gets an icy. You saw the video. Calmly gets an icy. In fact, he left the tip. Then he leaves there, leaves Walmart, goes on Coral Ridge Drive, and he goes to McDonald's. And I think, you remember the testimony, I think it was Officer Leonard. The McDonald's is about 1 point, from where he was arrested. McDonald's is 1.8 miles from where he was arrested. He was arrested on Wyndham Lakes Boulevard South. So he goes down to McDonald's, and sitting in McDonald's at a table is John Wilford. Just so happens, John Wilford is the brother of Madeline Wilford, who was shot and wounded in classroom 1213. But the defendant didn't know John Wilford, and John Wilford didn't know the defendant, but the defendant walks up to him as he's sitting in the booth, and he starts talking, and he asks John Wilford for a ride, and John Wilford says, I can't give you a ride, my mom's picking me up. And sure enough, the mother came, they both get up, John Wilford walks out, the defendant follows him, John Wilford gets in his mom's car, the defendant crosses Coral Ridge Drive into Wyndham Lakes and walks around. So Officer Leonard spots him and arrests him at approximately 12:40 p.m. So the place of arrest was 1.8 miles from McDonald's and 2.9 miles from Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, and he's placed under arrest. So when crime scene from the Broward Sheriff's Office comes, they obviously find, remember they found the video with the cell phone videos on it in the east stairwell. They find the Cabela bag in the east stairwell. Well, they also find, obviously, the rifle, the 5.56 Smith & Wesson M&P 15. Had a round in the chamber, as you probably know with a semi-automatic. Once a round goes out the barrel, another one pops in. So there was a round in the chamber, and there were 23 rounds still in the magazine. And the magazine, that was the magazine with a swastika on either side of it. Well, in that magazine, there were 23 rounds. Of the 23 rounds, guess what? 11 of them were tracer rounds. So, and in the vest, there were 5 magazines. There was a 40-round magazine, in the tactical vest in one of the pouches. There was a 40-round magazine that was fully loaded with 40 rounds. There were 3 30-round magazines that were fully loaded with 30 rounds. And there was another 30-round magazine that had 29 rounds in it. And in one of those magazines, there was another 9 tracer rounds. Now, remember George Bello? He was the firearms expert. He says, I can tell a tracer round when it's full because of the orange tip and how it's manufactured. But once it's fired, I can't tell if any of the casings that were found, of the 139 casings, if any of them were tracer rounds. But there were 11 tracer rounds in the magazine that was in the gun, and another 9 tracer rounds that were in one of the magazines that was found in the vest. The police also found 3 magazines on the first floor, an empty 10-round magazine, an empty 30-round magazine, and another magazine in the hallway that was a 30-round magazine that had 9 rounds in it that hadn't been fired. On the third floor, there was an empty 30-round magazine in the third floor hallway, and you can see in the video him reloading on the third floor. And there was a 40-round empty magazine in the teacher's lounge at 1240. So that was an empty 40 round. So there were 5 magazines. 4 of them were empty. 1 had 9 rounds in it. And of course, there was 23 rounds actually 24, because 1 in the chamber in the rifle that he left behind. So he carried out his plan. And his plan was, and he told everybody what his plan was. They found his phone, and the cell phone with 3 cell phone videos on it. And the one that he made on February the 11th, 2018, hello, my name is Nick. I'm going to be the next school shooter of 2018. My goal is to kill at least 20 people with an AR and a couple of tracer rounds. I think I can get it done. Location, Stoneman Douglas in Parkland, Florida. It's going to be a big event. And when you see me on the news, you'll know who I am. Haha, you're all going to die. Can't wait. Can't wait. That was his plan. He carried it out.